Worked with my hands for 41 years, roofing mostly. Hot summers in Georgia, cold winters in Tennessee, hauling shingles up ladders when my knees were already starting to complain about it. By the time I retired at 63, I had a paid-off house in Macon, a decent savings account, and 2 bad shoulders that reminded me every morning why I stopped. My name is Arthur. And this is the story of how I almost lost everything I had left to love. Because of my own son, my son. I'll call him by what he was to me then, my boy. 34 years old when this started. Charming the way some men are charming. Easy smile, quick laugh. The kind of person who could walk into a room and make everyone feel like they'd been waiting for him. I loved him completely, the way fathers do. The way that makes you blind to things you probably shouldn't be blind to. His wife, my daughter-in-law, was a different story. I never disliked her, not exactly. But there was something careful about her, something that watched. She smiled at me the same way every time I came over, the same width, the same duration, like she'd practiced it. My late wife, Eleanor, God rest her, used to say, "Arthur, you're too suspicious of that woman." Maybe she was right. Eleanor was usually right. Eleanor passed in the spring of 2017. Ovarian cancer. 14 months from diagnosis to the end. I won't talk about that much because I still can't do it without my chest going tight in a way that makes it hard to breathe. What I'll say is that after she was gone, the only thing that kept me vertical was my granddaughter, Lily. She was 4 years old when Eleanor died. My son and his wife had brought her over to the hospital near the end, and Lily had climbed up onto the bed next to Eleanor, small as a sparrow, and held her grandmother's hand without anyone telling her to. Eleanor looked at me over the top of that little head and smiled the realest smile I'd seen in months. "She's something," Eleanor said. That was all. Lily was something. She had Eleanor's eyes, that particular shade of gray-green that changes with the light. She asked questions constantly about everything, the kind of questions that made you think about things you'd stopped thinking about. "Grandpa, why does the moon follow the car? Grandpa, if a tree falls and nobody's there, does it make a sound?" She was 4, and she was already wrestling with philosophy. My son and his wife lived 40 minutes from me, close enough that I saw Lily most weekends. That was the arrangement, and I was grateful for it. I'd pick her up Saturday morning, bring her back Sunday evening. We'd go to the farmer's market on Forsyth Street, or drive out to Amazon River Park and feed the ducks, or just sit on my back porch and I'd teach her to play checkers. She got good at checkers fast. Started beating me before she turned 6, fair and square. Then things changed with my son. It happened over about 18 months, the way these things do. Not a single moment, but a slow drift. Like watching a boat pull away from a dock so gradually you almost don't notice until there's open water between you. He lost his job at the logistics company where he'd worked for 9 years. He found a new one, then lost that one too. There were arguments with his wife that he mentioned sideways, never directly. He started calling me late at night, voice a little thick, asking me questions about money. Not borrowing it yet, just asking. How much did I have in the 401k? What was the house worth? Had I thought about what I'd do with it? I told my neighbor about those conversations. My neighbor, who I'll call Bud, had been next door to me for 22 years. He's the kind of man who says very little, but what he says lands. He listened to me describe those calls, and then he said, "Arthur, that boy is calculating something." I told him he was wrong. I told him my son wasn't like that. I was wrong. In the fall of 2021, my son called me on a Tuesday afternoon. His wife was visiting her sister in Savannah, he said. Could I take Lily for a few days? Just until Sunday. Of course I could. He brought her over that evening with a backpack, clothes, her stuffed rabbit named Captain, her favorite cereal. He hugged her at the door, told her to be good for Grandpa, and he drove away. Sunday came. He didn't answer my calls. Monday, Tuesday. I drove to his house and rang the doorbell for 10 minutes. The neighbor across the street, a young woman I'd seen a few times, came out and told me quietly that my son and his wife had moved out 2 weeks ago. A moving truck, she said. She'd assumed they'd told family. They had not told family. I stood on that porch for a long time after she went back inside. Lily was in my truck eating a granola bar, watching something on my phone. She didn't know yet that the house her father had rented for 4 years was empty. She didn't know her bedroom, the one with the purple walls she'd picked herself, was bare. I drove home. I made her macaroni and cheese, the real kind, not from a box, the way Eleanor used to. Lily ate and talked about a book she was reading. She didn't ask when Daddy was coming. Not yet. I tried everything I could think of to find my son. His cell went to voicemail, then was disconnected. His wife's number was the same. I called his wife's sister in Savannah. She said they'd visited briefly and left, and she hadn't heard from them since. I contacted his last known employer. I hired a skip tracer, a man named Delbert, who found me a P.O. box in Nevada and nothing else. After 6 weeks, I stopped expecting the phone to ring with his voice on the other end. After 3 months, Lily asked me why Daddy didn't call. I sat across from her at the kitchen table, and I chose my words the way you choose your footing on a bad roof, carefully, one step at a time, testing before you put your weight down. I told her that her daddy was going through some difficult things, and that it wasn't about her, and that she was loved. She looked at me with Eleanor's gray-green eyes and said, "Are you going to send me away too?" I told her no. I told her she was home. I meant it. I made it true. I enrolled her in school under my address and became her emergency contact and her pickup person and her homework helper and her everything. I learned how to do a 6-year-old girl's hair well enough that the other mothers at school stopped looking at me with pity and started looking at me with something closer to respect. I went to every parent-teacher conference. I took a first aid certification course because I wanted to know what to do if she ever got hurt. I kept every document I could find, her birth certificate, her medical records, everything my son had left in her backpack, and whatever else I tracked down over the following months. I went to a family law attorney here in Macon, a woman named Sandra, who told me that my situation was unusual but not impossible. She helped me petition for temporary legal guardianship. The court granted it, provisionally, after a home visit and a review. It wasn't adoption, not full legal custody. It was a guardian arrangement that would need to be revisited, but it meant I could make decisions for Lily. It meant she could stay in her school. It meant she was protected. Mostly, it meant I could breathe. 7 years passed. 7 years of soccer games and science fair projects and a bad bout of the flu that had me sleeping in the chair next to her bed 3 nights straight. 7 years of summer drives up to the Blue Ridge Mountains and Christmases with Bud and his wife Loretta coming over and Lily teaching herself guitar and getting good at it. Better than good. 7 years of her drawing from a 6-year-old who still needed a nightlight into a 13-year-old who read novels in a single sitting and argued with me about politics at the dinner table with more conviction than most adults I know. She started calling me Dad somewhere around year 4, not Grandpa. Dad. I didn't correct her. I didn't know how to, and truthfully I didn't want to. In March of last year, I got a certified letter. I almost didn't open it. The return address was a law firm in Phoenix, Arizona. I sat with it on the kitchen counter for 2 days, before I finally opened it on a Saturday morning while Lily was still asleep. My son and his wife were filing for full parental custody of Lily. Immediate return of the child. The letter alleged that I had improperly retained a minor without proper legal authority, that the guardianship had been obtained without their knowledge or consent, and that they intended to petition the court to vacate the guardianship order and restore full parental rights. There were other words in that letter. Clinical, legal words. But the ones that hit me like something physical were near the bottom of the second page. They claimed I had refused to facilitate contact between the minor and her biological parents. They claimed Lily had been isolated from her family. They used the word alienation. I had to sit down. My hands were shaking, and I didn't notice until I set the letter on the table and watched my fingers tremble against the wood. I knew why they were doing this. I didn't know it yet with facts. Not then. But I knew it the way you know a storm is coming. Something in the air. Something that's been building. Eleanor's house, my house, had been appraised the previous fall when I'd looked into refinancing. $280,000. My retirement accounts had grown. I was 69 years old with no other children and a guardianship arrangement that hadn't been converted to formal adoption. I was, on paper, a 69-year-old man with assets and a claim on a minor that could be challenged. I called Sandra that Monday morning. She listened to everything, and then she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Arthur, how much documentation do you have?" I told her about the files. When my son dropped Lily off 7 years ago, there had been a piece of paper in that backpack. I almost missed it. It was folded inside, capped in the stuffed rabbit's front pocket, like he'd hidden it there deliberately or just stuffed it in without thinking. A handwritten note on the back of a grocery receipt. It said, "Can't do this anymore. She's better with you. Please take care of her. Don't try to find us." I had kept that piece of paper in a fireproof box in my bedroom closet. I had photographed it and sent the photograph to my own email address the week after I found it, and also printed a copy and had it notarized by a woman at the UPS store on Riverside Drive. I had kept every text message my son had ever sent me, backed up, printed, stored. I had the 6 weeks of unanswered calls logged in my phone records. I had a letter from Lily's pediatrician documenting her care under my supervision. I had 7 years of school records. I had the guardianship order. I had a letter from Bud, written and notarized, describing the night my son dropped Lily off and drove away. Sandra called it a paper trail. She said it quietly, with something in her voice that sounded almost like relief. The court date was set for November. 3 weeks before the hearing, something happened that I didn't expect. My daughter-in-law called me. Not my son, his wife. She called from a number I didn't recognize early on a weekday morning, and when I answered, she was whispering. She said she didn't have long. She said my son didn't know she was calling. She told me they had moved 4 times in 7 years. She told me about gambling debts, serious ones, the kind that involved people who don't send certified letters. They send other kinds of messages. She told me they had come back because a relative had died and left my son a small inheritance, and his lawyer had told him that if he regained custody of Lily, he could potentially access any assets held in trust for her, including, theoretically, whatever I might leave her in my estate. She said, "He's not coming back for her because he misses her. I want you to know that." Then she hung up. I told Sandra about the call. She told me to write down everything I remembered, every word, right away while it was fresh. I did that. I also called Bud and told him what had happened because I needed someone to know other than my lawyer, and because Bud has always been the person I called when things went sideways. Bud drove over that evening and sat with me on the back porch in the cold. Neither of us said much for a while. Then he said, "What do you need me to do?" I told him I needed him to be there at the hearing, to tell the court what he'd seen over 7 years. He said he'd already planned on it. The hearing was on a Thursday morning at the Bibb County Courthouse. I wore my good suit, the charcoal one Eleanor had helped me pick out for her brother's retirement party 12 years ago. It still fit, more or less. Sandra sat beside me. Bud sat in the gallery behind us, dressed better than I'd ever seen him. My son and his wife were there. I hadn't seen my son in 7 years. He looked older than I expected and thinner. And he didn't look at me when we were in the same room. His lawyer was a young man who carried himself with the kind of confidence that comes from a good suit and a firm that has its name on a building. The judge was a woman named the Honorable Patricia Okafor. She had a reputation, Sandra had told me, for patience and precision. She read everything before the hearing. She had clearly read everything. The other side presented their argument first. My son's lawyers spoke about parental rights, about the sanctity of the parent-child relationship, about how the guardianship had been obtained under circumstances that were now disputed. He used the word alienation again. He implied, without quite saying it, that I had taken advantage of a vulnerable young couple in crisis. Then Sandra spoke. She was quieter than the other lawyer, but she didn't need volume. She laid out the timeline, the text messages, the phone records. She introduced the grocery receipt note, the notarized original, and the digital backup. She called Bud to testify about the evening of Lily's arrival, the backpack, the short goodbye, the car that drove away and didn't come back. She also, with my permission, introduced the call log and my written account of the conversation with my daughter-in-law. The other lawyer objected to that last item. The judge overruled him and wrote something down. Then Lily was asked to speak. She was 13 years old, and she walked to the front of that room like she'd been walking into difficult situations her whole life, which, in a way, she had. The judge spoke to her gently, explaining that nobody was going to make her say anything she didn't want to say, and that she could take her time. Lily looked at the judge and said, "I'm not scared. I just want to say what's true." She said she didn't remember the night her father dropped her off. Not clearly, she'd been too young. But she said she remembered everything after. She said she remembered who came to her school plays, and who took her to the doctor, and who sat outside the bathroom door when she was sick in the night. She said she remembered who taught her to drive a nail, and who let her paint her bedroom whatever color she wanted, and who cried at her 5th grade graduation even though she told him not to. She said, "I haven't heard my father's voice in 7 years. I don't know why he's here now, but I know it's not because he missed me. Because if you miss someone for 7 years, you find a way to call." The courtroom was quiet after that. The judge looked at my son. She said, "I'd like to give you an opportunity to speak to your daughter's statement." My son said nothing. He looked at the table. The judge wrote something for a long time. Then she looked up and said that in her view, the evidence presented was clear and consistent, that the guardianship had been properly obtained and properly maintained, that there was no credible evidence of alienation or improper retention, and that the petition to vacate the guardianship was denied. She also referred the matter to the district attorney's office for review of potential child abandonment charges. She looked at my son when she said that last part. After the hearing, out in the hall, Bud shook my hand and then pulled me into a hug, which is not something Bud has ever done in 22 years. He's not a hugger. He did it anyway. I didn't see my son on the way out. His lawyer was talking to him quietly in a corner and they walked out a different door. I drove home and Lily was at school and the house was quiet. I sat in the kitchen for a long time, and I didn't do anything except look at Eleanor's handwriting on the grocery list she'd pinned to the refrigerator a few days before she went into the hospital 8 years ago. I'd never taken it down. Milk, she'd written. Lily's cereal, flowers for the table. Any color. I don't know exactly when I started crying. I know it was a long time before I stopped. When Lily came home that afternoon, she dropped her backpack by the door and came into the kitchen and looked at me. And she's always been too perceptive for her own good. So she just said, "Good news or bad?" I told her good. She nodded like she'd known it all along. She opened the refrigerator and said, "We need milk." I told her I'd go tomorrow. She said, "I'll come with you." I said that sounded fine. We had dinner that night, grilled chicken, roasted sweet potatoes, the simple things we'd settled into over 7 years of eating together. She told me about her history class. I told her about the news. She argued with me about something, I don't even remember what, some political thing she'd read about online. I pretended to be more annoyed than I was. Later, when she'd gone to bed, I went out to the back porch. It was cold but clear. The kind of November night where the stars are actually visible, which doesn't happen often enough in the city. I sat in the old wooden chair Eleanor used to use in the summers, the one I keep meaning to refinish and never do, and I listened to the neighborhood settle into quiet. Bud's porch light was on across the fence. After a few minutes, it went off. He'd seen mine on, and he'd left his on for company, the way he does sometimes. It's a small thing. It matters more than it sounds. I have thought, since then, about what I would have done differently if I would have fought harder earlier to get formal adoption. To make Lily's situation more legally airtight, Sandra says the guardianship was solid, that the outcome was the likely outcome regardless. Maybe that's true, but I think about the 3 weeks between that letter and the hearing, the nights I lay awake in the dark doing math about what I could lose. What I know is that when my son drove away from my house 7 years ago, he left behind something he thought was a burden. He left behind something that turned out to be everything. I don't know if he understood that. I don't know if he does now. Lily asked me once, about 2 years after she came to live with me, whether I was lonely. It was a random Tuesday and we were washing dishes and she just asked it out of nowhere, the way she does. I thought about it for a moment. Then I told her the truth, that I had been lonely after Eleanor for longer than I wanted to admit. That lonely was what I was when he dropped her off on that Tuesday evening in the fall, and that it stopped being true somewhat around the 3rd month, around the time she started leaving her shoes in the middle of the hallway where I'd trip over them, and eating all the good crackers without telling me, and laughing at things I said that weren't even meant to be funny. She dried the last dish and handed it to me to put away, because she's always been too short to reach the top shelf and probably always will be. And she said, "Okay, good." That was all. Okay, good. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything I had left to love, standing in my kitchen with a dish towel in her hand, telling me I was allowed to be okay. I've had a lot of time to think about cause and effect since that November morning in the courthouse. Not in any mystical sense. I'm too old and too practical for that. I mean it in the plainest way possible. The things we choose to do or not do tend to find their way back to us. Not always fast, not always in the form we expect. But they come back. My son made choices. He chose to leave. He chose 7 years of silence. He chose, when he finally did return, to come back not with an apology, but with a legal filing. Every one of those choices had a cost, and in that courtroom he paid some of it. Not all of it. I don't think you ever pay all of it, but some. And I made choices too. I chose to keep that grocery receipt note instead of throwing it away. I chose to get the guardianship formalized even when it felt like an overreaction. Even when my neighbor Bud looked at me sideways and said, "You really think you need all that paperwork?" I chose to document everything, not because I was planning for a fight, but because something in the back of my mind understood that Lily's security couldn't just live in my intentions, it had to live on paper, in filing cabinets, in the memory of a notary at a UPS store on Riverside Drive. That's the thing about responsibility that nobody talks about enough. It's not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It's just the quiet decision, again and again, to do the thing that protects the people who are counting on you, even when it's inconvenient, even when it costs you something, even when no one is watching. Lily never asked me to fight for her. She didn't have to. She was a child. That's not her job. Her job was to grow up safe, and mine was to make sure she could. I think a lot about what it means to truly show up for someone, not just in the big moments, not just in the courtroom, but in the Tuesday afternoons, the grocery runs, the nights you sit outside her bedroom door because she's sick and you don't want her to feel alone in it. That's where character actually gets built. Not in speeches, in the accumulation of ordinary choices made with care. And here's what I know about wisdom. For whatever it's worth from a 69-year-old man with bad shoulders, wisdom isn't something that arrives. It's something you earn by paying attention, by noticing what matters, by understanding, slowly and sometimes painfully, that the people in your life are not permanent, and that the way you treat them while you have them is the only thing you actually control. Sandra told me once, after the hearing, that the thing that won the case wasn't the guardianship order or the phone records. It was Lily. It was 13 years old, walking to the front of that room and telling the truth without flinching. That kind of courage doesn't appear from nowhere. It grows. It grows in houses where it's modeled, where honesty is treated as non-negotiable. where a child learns that telling the truth is worth the discomfort it might cause. I didn't teach Lily that in any formal way. I just tried to live it in front of her, every day, and hope she was paying attention. She was. If you're raising someone, a child, a grandchild, a niece, anyone, remember this: they are watching you more than they are listening to you. Your integrity is not a lesson you can teach. It's a thing they absorb, quietly, over years, from watching how you handle the hard moments, from watching whether you do the right thing when it costs you something. Lily stood up in that courtroom and told the truth, because that's what she'd seen done, over and over, in a small house in Macon, Georgia, by a retired roofer who was just trying to keep his promise. That's all any of us can do. Keep the promise. Do it again tomorrow. Let that be enough.